Mudeko.
Interesting.
You are welcome on Black Fire Network. It is exactly 26 minutes past 4 in Uganda, Kampala. Um, of course, this is a Wednesday, right? Yeah, this is a Wednesday. Um, of course, the weather outside is cold. It has been shining from morning.
Mm.
Um, this is the second session of our shows today. Um, with me, INNOSSETU, and Maria, and Africa Maria, here on Straight Talk Africa, supported by Black Fire Network. Um, our discussion this afternoon is going to base on how Black people, of course, for those that are watching us from, of course, Facebook. Before I dive into the topic, for those that are watching us from Facebook, Black Hot Fire Network Radio. For those that are watching from YouTube, Black Hot Fire Network, and of course Twitter, Black Hot Fire Network. Thank you for watching. Um, our topic this afternoon is going to base on how Black people should overcome racism. Um, we are not talking about the blacks that are outside Africa. Very many people will tell you that racism is outside Africa. Racism is in US, or racism in England, racism is in Russia, racism is in China. So here, we want to see how black people in the whole world, not only Africa or not only Europe or other countries, just like people. It is actually locally known that people from Europe, they are the people that undergo the situation of racism. But in Africa, we also experience this, right?
Yeah.
So that is our topic in this second session of our shows today. Again,
Yes, sir.
so when we talk about racism in Africa, this has been a recurring part of history of Africa. Racism. We know that ethnic pygmy populations in Central Africa suffer from racialized discrimination from Bantu people. Huh? Tekikuba. So, pygmies and Bantu differ physically and genetically due to long-lasting evolutionary segregation until the Bantu expansion brought back into close contact. Pygmies have been targeted for slavery by Bantu population continuing into modern age. They are frequently ostracized from participation into wider society in various African countries that they live in and are seen as untouchables. Racially motivated attacks occur in pygmies, including rape and cannibalism. We find these pygmies, some of them are in Congo trees. They took,
Truly for
yeah, kulaba osumagira. So when we talk,
Neza amazima.
yeah, when we talk about Botswana, how we can relate Botswana and racism in Africa, this is a short background or history about racism in Africa. We're going to talk about racism in Europe of African of people of black descent, but this is racism basically in Africa. We brought about this to make people know that, of course, racism doesn't mean all about that. It is a European-made kind of theory or ideology, but it also applies in Africa. We know that since mid 1990s, the central government of Botswana has been trying to move Bushmen out of the central Kalahari Game Reserve, even though the national constitution guarantees the Bushmen the right to live there in perpetuity. As of October, of course, in 2005, the government has resumed its policy of forcing all Bushmen of their lands in the game reserves using armed police and threats and of violence of or death. Many of the involuntarily displaced Bushmen live in scarred resettlement camps, and some have resorted to prostitution and alcoholism. We know that about 250 others remain in the game reserve or have remained to the Kalahari to resume their independent lifestyle. However, can you have Stone Age creatures continue to exist in the age of computers? It is something that it is something which looks awkward, because if at all a real president of Botswana, we normally talk about racism as something which is outside Africa, but we Africans, most of the African people are in Africa, they don't put this at the forefront. And this is one of the things that have brought Africa to be disunited, African people to be disunited in Africa, because of racism that is occurring within African communities. No matter the president of Botswana said that, can you allow the era of Stone Age creatures to continue existing in the age of computers? That's why these people are segregated in Botswana. First of all, we talked about the pygmies in Central Africa, the pygmies in Africa. We talked about them, and these are people that are discriminated. This is people because of their race. You know, pygmies, they are known for being short people. We have pygmies in Burundi, we have pygmies in Congo, of course. But why do we see racism? Because, of course, racism, this is the origin of tribalism in African communities and in Africa at large. So why do we separate ourselves? Why do we say that no, this kind of people, we need to separate them, we need to discriminate them racially? Because, of course, African people, we are all the same people. Why do we still see this happen in African countries? Um, uh, further information on mass interethnic violence. We know that uh, beginning about 1880, Catholic missionaries arrived in the Great Lakes region. I'm talking about Burundi. Later, when German forces occupied the area during the World War One, the conflict and the efforts for Catholic conversion became more pronounced as the Tutsi resisted conversion. The missionaries forced success only among the Hutu. In an effort to reward conversion, the colonial government confiscated traditionally Tutsi land and resigned aid to the Hutu tribes, igniting conflict that has lasted even up to now in the 21st century. There are the areas were ruled as a colony by German and Belgians because of the Tutsi had been traditionally governing elite. Both colonial powers kept the system and allowed only the Tutsi to be educated and only they could participate in their colonial government, such as discriminatory policies engaged resentment. Uh, of course, when the Belgians took over the colony, they believed the colony could be better governed if they continued to identify the different populations. In the 1920s, they required people. In the 1990s, of course, in the 1920s, they required the people to identify with a particular ethnic group and classified them in census. We know that European colonialists viewed Africans in general as children who needed to be guided. as, as people who needed to be guided. And I noted that the Tutsi to be the ruling culture in Rwanda and Burundi. In, of course, 1959, Belgians reversed its sentence and allowed the majority Hutu to assume control of the government through universal elections after. Together. Independence, this is partly reflected in internal Belgian domestic politics, who later saw the discrimination against the Hutu majority as similar to oppression with Belgian suffered from such a conflict that is actually up to now in Rwanda, Congo, and Burundi. The Tutsi Hutu discrimination. Chavira ddala eri wansi eri kuba n'Abagermany nga they want to identify these people like according to ethnicity, according to different ethnic groups. So we know that the Belgian policies of democratization and empowerment of the Hutu as a just response to the Tutsi domination, the Belgian policies wavered and flip-flopped considerably during the period leading to independence of Burundi and Rwanda. We know that the Hutu majority had revolted against the Tutsi but unable to take power. Tutsi fled and created exile communities outside Rwanda, like in Uganda and Tanzania. How does this come into existence? Because of racial discrimination. Some people may call it tribes, but initially in Africa, twali tetulina tribes. Okitegeera, twalinanga ethnic groups. Right? Embu bano Bahamite, simanya bano ba Nilotics, simanya ba fucking biki. Are you seeing that story? So we see the Tutsi flying to Uganda and some parts of Tanzania and Kenya, just because the Belgians and the German were supporting the what? The Hutu, because the Tutsi refused any kind of colonialism in those countries, in Burundi and Rwanda. Okitegeera? So babupressing okuleetawo that they favored the Hutu. So these people had to fly to Uganda and other neighboring East African countries. So they came to exile ne batandika okujja mu Uganda. Okitegeera? Ne batandika okulunda ente. I have to say that.
I think you know that the Belgium sponsored the Tutsi Rwandan monarchy, which of course survived until 1959.
So we know that, of course, since the nation's independence, more extremist Tutsi came to power and oppressed the Hutus, especially those who were educated. Because wadde tuvuma olumu Abatusi, but this was be bano be bali ba elite mu Rwanda, however much they are minorities. The Tutsi, okitegeera, they were the elites in Rwanda. So coming back from exile, they were Nagambye okutandikira okukola toyeeyidde toyeeyidde.
ekyalo kyonna kiri wano.
We know that I was saying that we know that we
We're
know
talking
that,
about the Hutu being the elites.
yeah, being the elites. Kati being the elite, I said about the Tutsi being the elites
Okay.
in Rwanda, that elite group. During that time, because of course very many people are educated.
But you know that the Tutsis were sponsored by the Belgians.
So, kati tulaba nti nno, like I said, since the national's independence, more extremist Tutsi came to power and oppressed the Hutus, especially those who were educated by then in Rwanda. From exile, but these people are educated. So their actions led to the deaths of 1,000 Hutus. Over discrimination from the colonial period was continued by different Rwandan and Burundian governments, including identity cards that distinguished for you to be a Tutsi or a Hutu. So these people issued never down in Uganda nti Abaganda balina kubeera ne national IDs. So these people were separate. They had different identity cards. Racial discrimination.
The Belgium made sure that they segregate people to identify that this one is
this one is a Hutu,
and the other one is a,
you must be with
they made them their IDs.
Identity cards. Furthermore, the Belgians sponsored the Tutsi Rwandan monarchy that survived up to 1959, like you said, when Kigeli the fifth was exiled from the colony. Of course, in Burundi, Tutsi who are minority maintained the control of the government and military. Right? So in Burundi, a campaign of genocidal violence known as the Ikiza in Rwanda was conducted against the country's Hutu population in 1972 and estimated of about 100,000 people that died. The Hutu died. Still, in 1993, Burundi's first democratically elected president, who was a Hutu, was believed to be assassinated by the Tutsi officers, as was the person constitutionally entitled to succeed him. So this sparkled a period of civil strife between the Hutu political structures and the Tutsi military. The Hutu in Burundi, the Hutu in Burundi, there were people that had power, in politics. So the death of this president in 1953 challenged all that political strife between the Hutu political structures and the Tutsi military, in which it is estimated over 500,000 Burundi people died in this. See whether they were Hutu or Tutsi. We know that there are very many mass killings of the Tutsi and moderate Hutus. These events were deemed genocide by the United Nations, but they know that this is racial discrimination.
But they, of course,
All
right, so okay, we thank you for that. By the way,
I don't know why people don't talk about racism in Africa. In Africa, it is one of the countries since of facing racism.
And because apparently people look at the other Muzungu and a black person, but we have seen Africans still doing the same thing. So then it's J, natural get up, Ethiopia. All right. Because the one going on the development.
ngenda gireeta ngira nga amubuuza akasa
So
totya wamma kwebali ate kwebali kendabe yakamala dakiika
come on.
genda maaso.
So, like you have said, people have for some time they have been addressing issues of the genocide in Rwanda, but little have they been addressing the cause of that genocide and why such kind of stories were happening in a country where supposedly people should be loving each other for the fact that there are only two groups of people living in the same country. But yeah, thank you for exploring that part of the racism in Burundi and Rwanda. And let's just dive into the issues in Somalia. Actually, we've had racism in Ethiopia. We've had issues of racism in Ethiopia now. Racism in Ethiopia has traditionally been directed at the country's Nilotic ethnic minorities, as well as other individuals with similarly pronounced Negroid. We know that physical features collectively, these groups, and the physical features, that's what I mean. For a very long time, Africans used to separate their groups by use of physical features. And somehow decide from this leg to the other, that one is group A. I'm naming like that to simplify. From when you cross that leg to the other side, we have these people. When you move to the other side, we have these people. That's why we have people who occupy the Great Lakes, we have people who occupy the mountainous areas, and they carry out different activities. But at the end of it all, they are Africans. Now we see that in Somalia, in Ethiopia, we have groups which are locally known as Shandakela or Baria, which are actually derogatory terms originally denoting slave descendants. Barrier means the donators of slave descendants. This, irrespective of the individual's family, it doesn't matter your history. It doesn't matter whether you were in a slave, whether you are a slave descendant or what. But the barrier people are known to be slave descendants in Ethiopia. Now, historically, the Shankwela, those are the barrier. When I say barrier and Shankwela, these are the same people. The Shankwela constituted most of the slave labor in the ruling local Afro-Asiatic societies. Now, we know that these people, we had also the people who were called the Habesha. Those the Habeshas were like the Highlanders. These were also noted as having actively hunted the Shankwela during the 19th century, following the abolition of the slave trade in the 1940s. Now, the Shankwela and the barrier freed were typically, first of all, they were typically unemployed. They did not have skills of labor, so they had to run and free. Now, the racial discrimination against the barrier or the Sankwela communities in Ethiopia still exists, affecting across to political and social opportunities and resources. Recently, we've seen a lot of Ethiopians being killed. There is still that massacre. There is still that massacre that actually is still going on until now. For a very long time, we've had, when we talk about Ethiopians, the first phase of Ethiopia we see are the Ethiopians who are mixed. These are Ethiopians who are mixed with other, whites and Asians. But we have the indigenous Ethiopians. and who until now they are called the descendants of the slaves. How painful. They are segregated for the fact that their parents were taken into slavery. They are segregated for the fact that throughout history they were used as laborers. They are segregated for the fact that these new people who settle in Ethiopia, actually, who came and invaded Ethiopia, were the slave masters. All over. These people, of course, came about after the Afro-Asiatic slave. That was the slave trade that actually that happened along the East African coast and other countries that fall in the umbrella of East Africa. Now, why should these people who just probably were even Moratos, simply naming them that, call these indigenous people the descendants of the slaves? Until now, they are not identified. And that's why even some, I'm sorry. And that's why you can see on TikTok, we've got a lot of idiots in Ethiopia who be standing like, we are not black. We know you are not. And no one is saying you are. Because even the black people who categorize themselves as Africans in Ethiopia, you call them the descendants of the slave. They do not have to have the same privileges that you do. And this has actually been going on for a long time. When we don't talk about racism in Africa, it is not that Africa doesn't experience. It is more painful. It is more and extremely painful for someone to mistreat you from a country or from a nation or from a continent where you belong. And yet the person who is mistreating you is the one who invaded. Is somebody who invaded, or is somebody who just came and somebody who someone who oppresses you. You understand? So, and at the end of the day, we shouldn't categorize ourselves, or we are not. I usually see them guys all over TikTok. We are not blacks. We are just these. Nobody is saying you should be. Nobody is saying you should be, please, because we know you are not. We know you are not, and nobody is saying you should. So, the people in Ethiopia who until today are still called the descendants of the slaves, that they are, until now, they are not given the privilege that other Ethiopians, of course, have. Now, traditionally, racism against perceived barrier transcended class remained in effect regardless of social position or percentage. Now, as a result, former president of Ethiopia, Mengistu Hamile Mariam, was virtually absent from the country's controlled press in the first few weeks of his seize of power. He also consciously avoided making public appearances, here too on the belief that his negroid or appearance would not sit well with the country's deposed political elite. Now, particularly the Amhara. Now, by contrast, the Mengistu rise to, of course, prominence was held by the Southern Shankwera group as a personal victory, with one of their own having made good. Remember, for some time, and actually, since Mengistu Haile, the former president of Ethiopia, came into power, it's like these other groups of Ethiopians wanted to put it clear that no matter what these others do, they will still remain the descendants of the slaves. And her success was celebrated throughout the southern, Ethiopia, and people jubilated, they celebrated, they were extremely excited about this. If you look at the map of Ethiopia, Ojala and Bono Southern is sharing a big part, the other East African countries. But these people, for a very long time, they were categorizing these other Ethiopian group of people like they are not supposed even to compete with them for different positions, both in government and social arrangements. Yeah. Ah, that's okay. See, love them so much.
Not necessarily.
What should we put on it? What should we put on it?
Mashambambala.
Yeah.
Tosobola kukitegeera.
So let's say that although other populations in Ethiopia have faced varying degrees of discrimination, little of that diversity has, by contrast, been on account of racial differences. It is instead more typical, rooted in disparities in class and, of course, competition for economic status. Now, the often socio-economical advantages Oromo and Goraj are thus not considered by the Highlander groups as being racially barrier, owing to their similar physical features and common Afro-Asiatic ancestry. Balinamu olukyootakyootaala kye ŋŋambye bamuleto. Whatever. But of course, we know that traditional perceptions of the Shankwera likewise racially construct themselves from the Afro-Asiatic populations. The Anua, the ones that they call the Anu or the Nilotics of southern Ethiopia, consequently regard the Amhara, Oromo, Tigray, and other Afro-Asiatic groups collectively as Gali, in contradiction to themselves. And
For me, even before that, they are Mara, they are the people that are having the biggest percentage in of course, Ethiopia. Until recently, judgment in whatever the war kali, it was a conflict. Well, was it a political conflict in that the Tigray people, they were fighting, they were chasing out all people from their land in Ethiopia. That was mean Mulumono Negun, Mutabani Wamukuru yayagala kusindikayo mali. To fight the Tigray. In fact, it was supporting the Tigray. Supplemented.
I don't have.
So Ethiopia is, and also racism is a wider topic in Africa. Very many people will not understand. And already Kugamba, we don't have racism in Africa. That is outside Africa. But of course, if we go into Gold Coast or Ivory Coast, we know that in 2001, Ivory Coast saw a resurgence in ethnic hatred and religious intolerance. In addition to many victims among the various tribes of the northern and southern region of the country that have perished in the ongoing conflict, foreigners residing or visiting Ivory Coast have also been subjected to violent attacks. We know that according to report by the Human Rights Watch in 2001, the Ivory Coast government was guilty of fanning ethnic hatred for its own political ends. Take it down. In 2004, the Young Patriots of Abidjan, a strongly nationalistic organization relied by state media, plundered positions of foreign nationals in Abidjan, rapes and beatings of persons of European and Lebanese descent followed. No deaths were reported. Thousands of expatriates and the whites and all other ethnic groups from Ivory Coast were attacked. Era ne bakijuwinga to condemnation. Sorry. Katukiraba nti no racism, it's not all about you're white, you're black. Kitegeera? Ate y'ensonga lwaki we can never unite in Africa.
Anti tulina obuzibu kati imagine when you look at Ethiopia, sorry to take you back. If you the first thing you will when you type in Google people in Ethiopia, the first images they will bring you are the Afro Asiatic Ethiopians. Those who are mixed. You understand? If not even the ones who are actually not Africans, what's it? Those are the first images they will bring you. They will never bring you the images of like the Anuaka people in Ethiopia. They will never bring you those images because those people look typically
like black people.
Like black people, their hair and everything. You can still go in and Google, guys. You'll get to know. We have this other group of people in Ethiopia that actually Ethiopia doesn't even talk about. They don't even want these people to be recognized as Ethiopians. I've not seen a new person coming up on TikTok claiming that they are not Africans. We have seen these Afrocentric people who are the ones who are complaining about we are not blacks, we are not Africans. You Africans stop saying we are blah blah. Don't talk shit like that. Don't talk shit that you know nothing about. We all know how those people came about. We all know how they came to live in Ethiopia. We all know the atrocities they committed. So if they think probably Africa is sleeping, we are not. We don't know what is going on. Unfortunately, Africa is waking up and realizing the truth. Okay, I Google about that.
The Tigray, how Tigray people look like. Batigare in Uganda. Which to Spain.
Uganda.
Tigray people. Hello, Spain. Yo take your wife. Uganda kule ku Mauritius, Mauritania. This is in Mauritania.
Batigale be bano ba Morat. Bebo. Bano ba Morat.
Bahamala be baberu benyini. Hamala. Sio kana
Amala. Sí, Baburak. Nabo barimo urukundi. Bavuga tusibere. Nyati bano bakisusiza.
Ethiopia.
Hello, you can fire. You're welcome on our live. Yeah. How are you doing? It's morning over there, I guess.
Okay.
I don't know what I'm using. So let me see. So kugamba chinjega istigeza niyo. Okay, nginasoma kuba Mauritania. So of course, like we are saying that like we are saying the Ethiopian people, we have different shades in Ethiopia. We have those people that the world doesn't see, of course, whom they call different names. We have that category of people in Ethiopia that are called the descendants of the slaves. We have others who call themselves the elites, like the VIPs. We have the ones who think they are the ones who are supposed to be educated. Apparently, they think for the entire Ethiopia. And I think those are the ones that the world focuses on. Because the moment you talk about Ethiopia, those are the people that the world shows. The people in Ethiopia also experience racial discrimination. But this time, let's also look at Mauritania. We know that slavery in Mauritania persists despite of its abolition in 1980 and mostly affects the descendants of Black Africans abducted into slavery who now live in Mauritania as Black Moors or the Heratin. Of course, we know these people partially still serve the white Moors or the Baida. Those white Moors are called the Baidan, and we know that the Black Mauritania people still serve as slaves until as of December 20th, 2023. We have Black people in Mauritania who still serve as Black Moors. They still serve as slaves until to date. Now, the practice of slavery in Mauritania is most dominant within the traditional upper class of the Moors for centuries. Now, the Heratin lower class, mostly poor Black Africans living in rural areas, have been considered natural slaves by these Moors. That the social attitudes have changed among most urban Moors, but in rural areas, the ancient divide remains. Now, the rural Bidens are descendants of the Sanhaja, Berbers, and the Beni Hassa Arab tribes who were immigrated to Northwest Africa and present day Western Sahara and Mauritania during the Middle Ages. We know that many descendants of the Bani Hassan tribes today still adhere to the supremacist ideology of their ancestors, which has caused the oppression, discrimination, and even enslavement of other groups in Mauritania. We know that, according to estimation, as many as 600,000 Black Mauritanians, or 20% of the population, are still enslaved. That many of them are used as bonded labor. Slavery in Mauritania was criminalized in August 2017, but it still exists. Apparently, as we talk about slavery everywhere in the world, we forget that slavery still exists in Mauritania even till today, where Black Moors are used as slave laborers to the white Moors who actually live in Mauritania. Like we said at the beginning of this topic, racism is not only in racism against the Black people is not only seen in the United States of America, it is not only seen in the United Kingdom, it is not only seen in the German racism is also experienced in Africa, like countries like Mauritania, where we still have the Black people acting as slaves to the white Moors until to date. It's very crazy. I think we are so clouded, our minds are very clouded, and the world doesn't let us see such kind of things. These are things I'm always like talking about. Apparently, you wake up and decide. Um, it is very sad. Apparently you wake up and decide Africans shouldn't do this. They are doing these acts against humanity. You feel like the important thing is that minor thing. And apparently we still have slaves in Africa, and the world does not talk about it. Slaves on their own land, people being made slaves. The black Moors are still slaves. Even as of 2023, as of 20th of December 2023, we still have black people in Africa who are slaves to the whites who invaded their land, came to their land, became the majorities. And we have seen these acts. They have tried so much. We would see the same stories, by the way, in South Africa. When I go through such kind of history and present situation, I'm sorry, my test for some people dies. There is no way you can convince me when we still have such kind of crimes that are acted upon Africans on their own land. But then most people don't know, because the moment we speak about racism, the first thing that crosses your mind is our brothers and sisters in the United States. If I'm being discriminated in my own land, then where should I go to? If the place where I come from is where I'm being discriminated by somebody who just came, if my ancestral home is where I'm being discriminated, then where do you think I should go to? So then I will comment. So we, of course, we decided that we are still first going to take you guys through a bit of the stories of these racial situations. Derek Askew, thank you. I'm here at work listening to your consciousness. Keep it going. Thank you so much. You can fire. Said like a comment here, Derek Askew. Why they just won't leave us alone. There is SQ asked the same question, At times there are things I hate talking about because they stir my anger, they kill my, I don't know. Because people always talk about slavery stuff like it is in the past, all right? But apparently this thing is still current. And I know the world knows that these kind of crimes are still existing. I know the world knows that we have slaves in Africa even as of now. We have people who are being slaves. We have people who are slave laborers to the whites in countries like Mauritania, and the world knows. But of course, they are not concerned. All they have to be concerned about is how your sexual life, how Africans are deciding to do their sex, why you have sex all the time to have too many babies, why you're deciding not to have homosexuality. Like, that is the important thing Africa needs right now. But anyway, that was Mauritania's with the racial discrimination. Now we're going to have a look at a country that is called Namibia. I told you guys we are first going to take you through the phases of these different countries in Africa that are experiencing this discrimination, so that you know, my brothers and sisters outside Africa, that as you heard, Africa bleeds. Africa is experiencing nothing different from what you're experiencing. We are apparently experiencing the same thing, but the world is very quiet about this. You might have heard the voice, you might have heard the cameras to show the world that Black people in America are being shot dead. Now, these particular tribes in Africa, some of them do not have the privilege to show the world what is going on. The world is silent, but these crimes against humanity are still taking place in the hearts of Africa from history to the present. Apparently, slavery still exists. And we also have tribes that discriminate. I've told you about Ethiopia, where those people who joined Ethiopia in the later years, again, are discriminating the indigenous Ethiopians, calling them the children of the slave. they are the descendants of the slaves, so they do not have the right to own, they do not have the right to have the privileges. They, since they are masters, they were the masters of these slaves. So the slaves don't have the privilege, don't have the right to have the equal privilege like the children, the descendants of their masters. Now that's the difference, that's the struggle, that is the war that is taking place in Ethiopia until now. So the descendants of the slave masters want to command the descendants of the slave masters, like they say it. We have the slave, the descendants of the slave, and the descendants of the masters to the slaves. Those are the two societies in Ethiopia. And until now, people are dying. There is a genocide that is still taking place. We have seen some of them all over different social medias, TikTok, Facebook, everywhere. They claim we are not Black people. Don't call us Africans. We are not Africans. We know you are not. Whoever called you that is stupid, because we never did. Whoever called you that probably doesn't know where you come from. They don't know your stories. That's why they think you are. Nobody called them Africans. I did not. I know many people did not. But how about those indigenous people who were in Ethiopia at that time, that the cameras don't show us, that the media doesn't show us, the ones that are being killed every time, the ones who don't attain education, the ones who have not been privileged, the ones who have not been given the right of their freedom, the ones who don't even have to breathe in Ethiopia. Well, how about if we talk about those people? Before you start saying, since I'm not Black, you look at me. We know you are not. We know you are not. Whoever is calling you that must be stupid. I usually tell them all the time when I come across those kind of videos on TikTok, I tell them whoever says you're Black must be stupid, because I cannot call you that, because we are not. We know the real people. You understand? So as we dive into Namibia, we all should understand that working together as a community, as the Black people, is very, very important. For a very long time, we decide to take ourselves through this kind of events so that we can get to know. Probably the more you get to know how we are suffering, you understand one thing: you are not alone in this. You understand the second thing: you are not left behind. You understand the third thing: we need to come up with a solution. We need to unite as a Black people all over the world to understand the power we hold as Black people and to embrace who we are. That's one thing. Let's stop mixing, let's stop having mixed feelings about people, because we are giving the liberty of other people who don't care to describe themselves as Black people to take control of us over our own land. All right. Now let's look at, of course, racism in Namibia. If you guys follow the history, or we say that on the 12th of January, Kariwa.
Genocide is
The Herero and the
about the Tutsi and the Hutu in Burundi and Rwanda. So we have the Herero and the Nama.
the Namake genocide in Namibia. Some time back, guys, I took you through the Namibia struggle with the German colonialists, and how the Herero people, of course, were massacred. And that story still lingers in my mind. And as of today, since our topic is about racism, we are going to have a little bit of a recap of that same Herero story. Now, on the 12th of January 1904, the Herero people, led by Samuel Maherero, rebelled against the German colonial rule. And in August, we saw that was like in January the same year. And then after some months, around August the same year, German General Lothar Trotha defeated the Herero in the Battle of the Waterberg, and of course drove them into the desert of Amaheke, where most of them died of thirst. I told you about this story. I remember, guys, I narrated you how this story happened. When we saw one of the chief of the Herero, of course, acting as a mediator or a blocker, or someone who was, or a middleman who was trying to unite the Herero people with the German. And then, of course, they promised the Herero that they must meet and discuss on how to end this war, and of course, give them their freedom. But as the Herero people were marching to come and meet at a certain water body, little did they know that the German militaries were, of course, circumferencing them. So by the time the Germans started firing, the Herero people decided to move back. But moving back, the German army was moving forward, and these people were caught in the desert where apparently a lot of Herero people lost their lives. And of course, most of them died because of thirst. And the Nama people also rebelled against the Germans, suffering a similar fate. The violence eventually led to genocide of the Herero and the Nama people by the German, known as the Herero and the Nama genocide. In total, we saw a hundred of thousands Herero and ten thousands of Nama who died. Now, the genocide was characterized by a high number of deaths from starvation and thirst. The Herero who flee the violence were prevented from returning from the Namibia desert, where some sources also claim that the German colonial army systematically poisoned the desert wells where the genocide took place between that same year. Now, in German, of course, we see the Southwest Africa, um, of course, which is Namibia today. You see this story, the story had a lot of mixed feelings. Together with the German, a lot of stories were, letters were written to the German, others to their board as the colonizers. And it was, these letters were letters of, were very cunning letters, actually. And we see Germans sending their military troops from all over their colonial territories to come and fight the Hereros. And we see also those few Hereros who could have survived. The wells were poisoned by the Germans. That means whoever rushed to take some water will definitely die. And then the few who survived or who surrendered were killed, and others were taken to concentration camps in different places where they were, of course, uh, where they became slave laborers. If you look at the story of the Herero within the desert of Namibia, it's a very sad story. Usually, whenever we had genocides in Africa, these genocides always acted on, of course, wiping away a specific ethnic or a specific kind of people within the African society. But like I always say, you can never wipe Africa entirely. You kill 7, 14 are born. You kill 5, 20 are born. You kill. So Africa is here to stay now, tomorrow, and forever. There is nowhere Africa is going. So we have seen all these kind of atrocities that have been committed on the Africa's soil. Sorry. Look at that, Namibia.
Man China, man. The man China. Come here.
Thank God, 1926.
So, racism in Africa, it can be termed in very many things like ethnic wars, tribal wars, but it is racism. It is racism. We talked about how Rwanda, Burundi people were classified, were given different identity cards depending on ethnicity. You were Tutsi, you have to bear a different national or whatever identity card, and the Tutsi had two, the Hutu. So we see that expect for we see that that the genocide of the Nama Herero genocide, we see that were withdrawn and destroyed following a decision of the then Legislative Assembly in Namibia. Survivors of this genocide, majorly of whom were women and children, were eventually put in concentration camps, like you said, such as one of the Shark Island, where the German authorities forced them to work as slaves for German military and settlers. We know that all prisoners were categorized into groups fit until for work,
Fit and unfit for.
fit and unfit for work, and pre-printed death certificates indicating death by exhaustion following privatization were issued. We know that the British government published their widely known account of German genocide of the Nama Herero peoples. When you talk about that, we know that many Herero died later of diseases, overwork, and malnutrition. These camps, such as the Shark Island camps and the Windhoek, had mortality rates of high as 61%. The mortality rate in these camps was 45% in 1908. We know that the death rates calculated between 69 and 74%. Food in these camps was extremely scarce, which made actually very many people to die, consisting of rice and no additions. Shooting, hanging, and beating were common, and the Sijabok was used by guards who treated and forced laborers harshly. Medical experiments were performed on Herero people and Nama people by the Germans, similar to those concentration camps um, to conduct medical experiments, like I said, on the race using children of Herero people and
The
and
Moratos.
the Maroto children of Herero women and German men as test subjects. You know, just impregnating
African women just to use their children. Of course, we are Moratos to test them. Germans were testing these Moratos after raping and impregnating the women, and they also test these other children who are not Moratos, and then the German men would also test themselves.
So we know that time came, and with the closure of these concentration camps, all surviving Herero people were distributed as laborers for settlers in German colony. And from then on, all Herero over the age of 7 were forced to wear metal disc.
With their registration numbers.
Labor registration numbers. Imagine someone of 7 working for you to do what?
7 years, a 7-year-old child.
And banned from owning land or cattle or a necessity of pastoral society. We see that, of course, in 1985, the United Nations classified that aftermath as the attempt to exterminate the Herero as Nama people of Southwest Africa, and therefore one of the earliest attempts of genocide in the 20th century. We know that the German government recognized and apologized for the events in 2014 for what it did, because it was racism, but has ruled out financial compensation for the land and reparation of victim descendants, because very many people were killed in this. The about 400 commercial landowners, mostly the whites, own over 50% of the arable land across the country, despite of the land reforms processes undertaken by Namibian government currently. We know that when the country was taken, Southwest Africa, white Namibians enjoyed a highly privileged privilege, a highly
Mm.
position due to apartheid laws enforcing strict segregation and white domination in Namibia.
And until
Do you know
today,
that
by the way, we
apartheid,
still
yeah,
have the
apartheid and,
Namibians.
and segregation was not only in South Africa, the real South Africa. It was also in these countries, Lesotho, Namibia, bonna 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 buliraanyeewo awo.
And here is South Africa.
Bonna bonna nga bali mu South Africa.
Until today, we still have the Moretos. We still have the Moretos in Namibia. We still have those people who have that mixed, whatever, with the Germans and a lot more. Africa till now is experiencing racism from the colonial masters to the indigenous people in Africa. The stories aside, but like I said, before we dive into these solutions, like what should we do to fight and overcome all the things, someone out there may think like, why should Africans fight racism when they actually
They're
don't
not facing this,
experience
yeah.
it? And this is why we decided to take you through these stories so that you should know that actually racism is in Africa. Africans experience it at a different level. We are seeing the majorities, we are seeing the struggles, we are seeing the discrimination. But I believe at the end of this discussion today, we may learn one or two things from one another and probably put this at heart or even put this in action, and we see what the future holds for us as Black people all over the world. Now, um, we're going to look at a country that, of course, is called a country called Niger. And Niger has been known for its political power of recent. It's very prominent for the coups. It's very prominent for the struggle of change. But of course, let's drive you back in 26, where Niger announced that it would deport to Chad the Difa Arabs. Those are the Arabs living in the Difa region of the eastern Niger. Their population numbered about 150,000, while the government was rounding up Arabs in preparation for the deportation. 2 girls died, reportedly after fleeing government forces, and 3 women suffered miscarriage. Niger's government eventually suspended their controversial decisions to deport these Arabs. If you see Nigeria is bordering Libya, and we see ate kano katutemye endwala mukwano, katutemye endwala kibyenjobyedde. So these other people were believed that they were not Arabs. They believed they were, of course, people people from Niger. But because the past history of Niger and the Arabs isn't something to be proud of, people were furious to the point that apparently, I know these were Moratos who suffered the consequences at that time. But we know that in Niger, while the practice of slavery was outlawed, that is around 2003, we know that more than 800,000 people are still slaves, which is almost 8% of the population. Slavery dates back centuries in Niger and was criminalized after 5 years of lobbying by Anti-Slavery International and Nigerian Human Rights Group. Um, till to date in Niger, as we discuss about Niger's political atmosphere and the fears and the spheres around the political arenas of Niger, always have at the back of your mind that 8% of the people in Niger are still being slaves. They are still slaves to others. They are still slaves to the so-called high class of people in Niger. So apparently you guys thought that slavery was abolished. Apparently some of you didn't believe that slavery still exists in Africa. Now we said that descendant-based slavery, of course, are where generations of the same family are born into bondage, is traditionally practiced by at least 4 of Niger's 8 ethnic groups. The slave masters are mostly from the lighter-skinned nomadic tribes. I repeat, the slave masters in Niger. At the end of it all, this takes us back to our skin. If you follow the stories from the first country we discussed about up to Niger now, this whole story takes us back to our skin. That most of the slave masters until now in Niger, they are the light-skinned nomadic tribes. The Tuareg, Fulani, Taubao, and above all, the Arabs in Niger. Now, it is especially right among the warlike territory located in the wild desert of North and West Niger, who roam near the borders, while Mali and Algeria in the region of Say on the right bank of the river Niger. It is estimated that 3/4 of the population around 1904 to 05 was composed of slaves. 3/4 of the population around these places were composed of slaves. Historically, the Tuareg swelled the ranks of their black slaves by conducting war raids into other people's lands. War was the main source of supply of slaves, although many were bought at slave markets, which ran mostly by the people around those places. Now, we have in Africa, we have got different kinds of people. And we still have people who claim that there are particular Moratos in East Africa who are actually not indigenous and stuff like that. There is also saying that the Moratos in East Africa are most privileged compared to these other indigenous people in East Africa. The story of Morato still continues throughout history. You can see that the evil in their blood can never change. They did not exist during the days of their forefathers committing crimes and atrocities on the lands of Africa, but that evil still dwells in them, that even right now they still feel like they have to own a slave because this is their doing. This is how evil they are. I always tell you guys, waking up and feeling the power to fight for truth and the liberation of the Black people isn't something you learn from school. You check your ancestors. They fought way back, just like these Igbo people, because right now we don't see no German people in Africa. We don't see those who carried out slave trade now, but they are children. They are Morato children. It doesn't matter whether somebody slept with who, whether the child came from a Black woman, those children still have those traits within their bloodstream. That is why it is very important for the Black people to always remember, sleep with the right person. This is very important. And I think this is one important thing that most of us really forget. But anyway, that discussion of course, I will discuss about that when we come right into the solutions. Like we said, what should we do to overcome all these kind of things that are still happening in Africa? tugenda kwogera ku lwaki solutions kati tukyalina
singa lwali okutubeera mu dakiika nga 3 mbaleka ne Rwanda mbandireka
nerindako okibaye topiki yabadde egamba tukole tutya okulwanyisa
anti wano tuli mu details
ne tetunnatuuka ku mutwe gwa
kale tekikola kakyogambe tovanga ku mulamu
ebyo sibiwakanyizza just nkugambye sigambe mbisivangako ku mulamwa kale agenda yogera ku Rwanda then nkonogawo pigimi sagala kwogera tuba katolede bapigimi balimu mbu babantu sinabe batonda bapigimi zikyo sikikkiriza babantu
anti irusisimu
gokikakasa wali bapigimi wali olabyewo abo
babatunda kati kenkubuulire bapigimi n'abatwa actually abatwa babastrokinga n'abapigimi abatwa mu Rwanda n'abatwa mu Burundi
babatunda anti mu Kongo abo Burundi anti twogera ku babatunda
tukebere wantula naye si byakati naye kyemmanyi bano abantu bakyali mistreated even up to now babalabanga abatali bantu ate nga bagamba these were the real descendants abagundi aba Rwanda bo baalimu babasanga zino groups endala zonna ane mu Congo gye bali ne mu Rwanda gye bali
akwanti mu Rwanda ate mu Congo they are 2%.
Kati mu Rwanda bali 1%. Mwakuba mu Rwanda ne mu Burundi babayita batwa but they are the same people. The introduction. So when we talk about racism in the Republic of Congo, we see that where pygmies make up to 2% of the population. However much a population may be small in a country, it doesn't mean to discriminate someone. There is no way you can tell me that for Lokuba tuli batono you have to discriminate us. It doesn't make sense. We see that many pygmies lived as slaves to Bantu masters in Congo. The nation is deeply stratified between their two major ethnic groups. The pygmy slaves belong from birth to their Bantu masters in a relationship that Bantus call a time-honored tradition. Even though the pygmies are responsible for much of hunting, fishing, and manual labor, jungle villages, pygmies and Bantu alike kati kino kankinyonyola mu Luganda. Nyonyola kwe sinyonyola muntu yenna. Olaba bano ba pygmies balinganga olaba abatuusi, how the Tutsis were in Uganda. You know that those people were working as slaves here for Baganda or Ugandan people. They're working as slaves nga bakola waka. Okimanyi omuntu abeera slave obeera master amukozesa. Even
baali bakola mu Baganda okka mu Bwakabaka.
Si mu Bwakabaka bokka nga neeyo mu byalo baaliyo nga balimira abantu nga balirira abantu
bakuva ku mulaalo. Abantu abo badduka ne beekweka mu Bwakabaka. Jjukira ebyo ebiseera Muteesa.
Sooka owulire nkubuulire. There were nontonole mu Bwakabaka bokka. Nene bali mu bantu baaliyo. Baspreadinga buli omu ngamba wano mu Buganda because I know kati laba you know about this sijja mwogera nnyo. Do you know that the ancestors be baali wano nga beewake but nyate tebaali mu Bwakabaka.
Those people were the ones who were sent to eliminate. whenever they would eliminate nga batwala ettaka kati olaba nga luno olutalo lwetulabye ku simu lwe bagambe mutte muleete nti we want to see they would send okwe-eliminating abantu
There are 3 deuces I know in my village. Ettaka baali babubi jjajja yali bawawi just to work bamukolera okumala ebbanga ne naalibawa. Yeah. I know them. Jjajja azaala maama. They are working at home, be balunda ente, be batwala embuzi, they dig, batuka ekiseera ne bafuuka bawaka. Then they give them land. Free land. Tosobola na bajjako essaawa zino. In fact, recently they had conflicts with akulira ekika. They were like, these people, they don't belong to this land. Kuba balina ekyapa kyawo wonna wonna. They wanted to chase them away. Naye bazaaliddewo abaana ne bazikawo abantu.
Oyawula omuntu okubeera omukozi ne sireevu. Sireevu talina right ya kutaininga land whatsoever.
Okuggyako nga bamuwadde.
Ate sireevu tasasulwa. Sireevu omuntu akola free. Omanyi ekitegeeza sireevu? Free. Ekigambo kiri free tekifuula slave. Free like FRE. Ng'okola omulimu ku bwereere nga tosasulwa ate nga bakukaka tosasulwa kyekifuula omuntu slave nga muntu muno n'omukozesa against their will n'owakaka ne babanga abasibe at the end of the day n'otamusasula.
Si buli basireve ntebasasula.
Kati ekigambo sirevu kifuuse kirala kanadi kati kifuuse kirala. Waliwo omukozi akola nga leba waaka ne sirevu. Kati obaleba waaka kuva dda. Olaba nawe wasobola ng'ogenda mu Bwakabaka obona okola ng'omutima gwagala because kati nava wano tugambe tubasirevu bamutaka oyo.
Ekyo kyanjawulo. We did not leave our country. We did not leave our country to work in a foreign country.
Kyogamba basirevu balivinga na okukola mu foreign country. Abantu bagenda okukola mu foreign country baba basirevu.
Obviously.
Kasita bakutwala against your will.
Why do you think the Kadamas are called slaves?
Togenda kunzikiriza taamu eyo.
Nange togenda kunzikiriza kyesitagenda kukkiriza. Yogera kukundi tugende mu
kwogera okasokeitaipinga muwana agenda kwogera kukanga maama akubye
sijiddamu
yogera ewalala
sijiddamu. Let me first see here whether you have some new comments. Dakika 22 ozikakasa ndi nogondeza olina solution zinaamalayo Ope another and because that will be there. Any evidence into slavery. Chirabi. Kati in your conclusion, concluding Uchengami. Ekyomukyalo nze sijja kugira nnyo mu Buganda because I saw some of these people.
Abakozi newaffe balinga saakunyumiza so nenkugamba nti olwo abantu abajja okulima jjajjaffe n'abawa ettaka. Did I tell you that? Abantu abo balingawo ensi people naturally abantu wabeerayo era omunene n'omuki abantu basobola kubeera ku the same level but omuntu okufuuka sireevu wo gwasalawo n'okugamba tugenda kwebaka solanga otudde at the end of the day bw'akola ekyo ekintu almost talina aba afuuse property nga bw'okwata embuzi yo n'enkoko n'ogisumulira n'ogigalira n'osalawo odira ogenda gijja ku mutwe wani gw'oyagala ogiwa. You don't have a say, you don't have a decision. Toina kyosobola kola. Kati ate by the way, ekintu ekyo kyoyogedde, why did I argue about it a lot? Waliwo abantu abagenda ne bagamba nti no, Africa had slavery. Waliwo articles zosoma when they are telling you nti Africa ya introducing a slavery. Kati ngakwe eyo sibundi gyobadde olina segambe like that's what you were like saying. There were articles also I remember last time the Black Americans were arguing about this. Ndimu wahiriza abazungu nemu abaleeta slavery. Muzungu yakopa slavery okuveeyo kuba mwakozesanga abantu. Waliwo okozesa omuntu ne slavery. But now these other people did not understand the idea to the point nti baali babuleminga nti omuzungu yajja n'abakoppako obukopi nti omuntu bamukozesa ne bamukola bitya, but that wasn't originally the idea. Anyways, ayonsome article eri oba ogaanye ekisoma. So nga saagala kwogera ku Rwanda nga mpanvu erimu ne Roman Catholic biki twalayo waggulu tulabe oba enyuma tulina na Somalia tulinamu babantu Phoenix mu Somalia obadde okimanyi?
kubanga babantu bayita mu Somalia, they believe to have passed through Somalia, while babantu bayinza okuba batya nga tebali abamu ku bakadde be baaleka
Anyway, at the beginning of 1880, the Roman Catholic missionaries arrived in the Great Lakes region. Later, when the German forces occupied the area during the World War I, now the conflicts and efforts for Catholic conversion became more pronounced as the Tutsi resisted conversions. The Tutsi resisted converting to Catholic. The missionaries found success only among the Hutu. Now, in an effort to reward conversion, the colonial government confiscated traditionally Tutsi land and reassigned it to the Hutu tribes, igniting a conflict that has lasted into the 21st century. Now we know that the area was ruled as a colony by the German before World War I and Belgium. Now, because Tutsi had been the traditional governing elite, both colonial powers kept this system and allowed only the Tutsi to be educated, and only they could participate in the colonial government. Such discriminatory policies of course angered and of course engineered resentment between the Tutsis and the Hutus. Now, when the Belgians took over the colony, they believed the colony could be better governed if they continued to identify the different populations of these two people, that's the Tutsis and of course the Hutus. Now, in 1920s, they required people to identify with a particular ethnic group and classified them in censuses. Now, the European colonialists viewed Africans in general as children who needed to be guided, but noted the Tutsi to be the ruling culture in Rwanda, Burundi. This effect did not only work in Rwanda, by the way. We see that Tutsi wanting to take over the entire East African community. Sure, but well, it is what it is. So anyway, so like in 1959, Belgium reversed its stance and allowed the majority Hutu to assume control of the government through universal elections after independence. Now, this party reflected internal Belgian domestic politics, who later saw the discrimination against the Hutu majority as similar to oppression within Belgium suffered from the Fleminism Wallon conflict. Now they saw the democratization and the empowerment of the Hutu as a just response to the Tutsi domination. Remember, these are the guys who started this at the beginning, and later along the run, they decide that now, since the Tutsi are trying to withdraw, probably they are not, of course, giving in what they promise. Now it is high time we give power to the Hutu majorities, of course. Now the Belgian policies wavered and flip-flopped considerably during this period leading up to independence of Burundi and Rwanda. Now, the Hutu majority had revolted against the Tutsi in 1959 and taken power. The Tutsis fled and created exile communities outside Rwanda, in Uganda, and Tanzania. Since Burundi's independence, more extremists Tutsis came to power and oppressed the Hutus, especially those who were educated. Their actions led to the death of up to 200,000 Hutus. Uh, and of course, overt discrimination from the colonial period was continued by different Rwandan and Burundian governments, including identity cards that distinguished the Tutsis and the Hutus. The Belgian sponsored Tutsi monarchy survived until 1959 when Kigali V was exiled from the colony, then called Rwanda or Urundi in Rwanda. The political power was transferred from the minority Tutsi to the majority Hutu. Now, in Rwanda, a Tutsi rebel group, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, invaded Rwanda from Uganda, which started a civil war against Rwanda's Hutu government in 1990. Of course, a peace agreement was signed, but violence erupted again, culminating in the Rwandan genocide of 1994, when the Hutu extremists killed an estimated 800,000 Rwandese, mostly Tutsis, which of course claimed about 30% of the Twa population of Rwanda were also killed. 30%. What do you one?
No,
Kati babatta bali ne wasigalawo one.
no. Generally, 30% esobola contributing ku bantu abattibwa naye nga 1% esigalawo as a general population nti the Hutu balina over 85%. 85% mu Rwanda Hutu. However, tebalina power. Tebalina si be bali mbuyiza. Kati bali Abatuusi balina 14%. Rwanda.
Now you can understand the situation in Rwanda. You can understand why the big majority of
Rwanda, they
Rwanda
talk
people
about
are
the
not
minority
benefiting.
Tutsi.
That's why actually Rwanda's development is not the of course helping the majorities because apparently they are Hutus. So Kagame is working only to benefit the Tutsi people. Still, we have that racial discrimination, of course, in Rwanda. Now we're gonna drive you a little bit to Somalia. Now we should say that Somalia, the Somali Bantu ethnic minority faces significant stigmatization in Somali society due to their different physical appearance and ancestry from the Kushite origin majority of Somalia. Now, racialized emphases, epithets targeted at the Somali Bantu community exist, such as Adon or the slave, similar in connotation to the Arab term Abid. Now, the marginalization of the Somali Bantu community is primarily based on ethno-racial factors, unlike the marginalization of the Madhaban and other Somali origin minorities, which is primarily based on their status as society constructed caste. Now, the ethnic Somalis and populations of the Bantu stock are genetically divergent. Of course, racially motivated attacks on Somali Bantus have occurred. Journalists who bring attention to discrimination against Somali Bantus, of course, have suffered from death threats, and some have fled the country as a result. We know that the 4.5 parliamentary formula under the transitional federation government has been criticized as a form of legislative apartheid. Apparently, the Somali Bantu indigenous people in Somalia have been discriminated for a very long time. They are usually called as the Adon which of course means slave. Like I tell you guys, if you still follow these stories, they still drive us back to the days of colonialism, that slavery has never ended. The Bantu speaking Somali people in Somalia are still identified as the Adon or the slaves in Somalia. So these are the people who are Moratos with the Arab and other of course, races believe that they ought to be superior than these Bantu speaking Somalis in Somalia. And katikitegeza bano betulaba wano be bali abayisa babyobubi. This is why I tell you, whenever we see refugees coming to different countries, they are only privileged refugees who come. The unprivileged people don't even have the power, and that's why we still see wars in Somalia, where the Al-Shabaabs is that not the Arab Muslim thing? The Al-Shabaab still feel like they have to kill the Bantu speaking Somalis in Somalia. So we still have a tribal, a racial war between the so-called slave masters and the slaves. Apparently, the dark-skinned people are usually identified as slaves, even on Africa's soil. And those who are light-skinned still call themselves slave masters. Of course, I'm not going to say light-skinned because Africa comes in different shades. We have too dark, we have bronze, we have all those shades of black. But when I talk about the light-skinned ones, I'm talking about the Moratos, you guys. I hope you understand the Moratos when I say Moratos. So we have got those Moratos until to date who still feel like these other Africans don't deserve their peace because definitely they are still slaves to them. So uh that is the racism situation down in Somalia. You guys, from the stories, for those who are just joining in, we have been exploring the racism situations in Africa to let you know, in African countries, to let you know, guys, probably you may to be experiencing racism wherever you are. And when Africans speak about racism, some people are like, what are you talking about? Oh, well, I mean, why are you talking about racism? It's not a matter of Africa. This is not your concern. Wow, to bust your bubbles, we still experience racism here in Africa. And as much as the world doesn't want to talk about the existence of Moratos and their racial discrimination, down here it is huge. It is huge because for them, they feel they should be privileged. They still call the indigenous black people the slaves. And for them, they call themselves the slave masters because their forefathers were slave masters to the indigenous people from the particular lands where they are. So we saw that story. We've seen that story from, of course, straight up from Rwanda, Burundi, Namibia, Somalia, Ethiopia, Niger, Mauritania, where actually we still have black people who are working as slaves to the white Moors. We have the white and the black Moors. So the black Moors are still slaves and to the white Moors until of now, as we speak. We still have slaves in Mauritania where black people are still acting as slaves, working for those others for no wages. So apparently, because the white Moors believe that black people were born to be slaves, so they can't be something else. So that you can make however tunyumye kubiri tulekera busana
Racism in South Africa.
Racism in South Africa.
So, So racism in South Africa, we have talked about different African countries, almost all African countries
Mm.
experiencing this kind of discrimination, this kind of separations. These are mostly blacks discriminating our fellow blacks
They are
in
not
this.
actually
Yeah,
blacks.
yeah, we
They
are
are
not. Yeah,
mulattoes.
we are not in USA. We're not right just here.
They are not.
Mm,
Their forefathers came here and
mm,
they were doing that bullshit.
mm,
They are not. Even if you call them, you have seen them on TikTok. They say they are not. It's true, they are not.
mm,
If you look at the ones in Ethiopians who are saying they are
mm,
not.
mm.
They are not.
So when
They
we
are
go
not.
into South Africa, we see that racism is still prevalent in South Africa. The end of apartheid might have removed actually some legal framework allowing institutionalized racism. We see that, however, racism in South Africa both predicts and encompasses more just in the institutional racism of apartheid that we had.
Mm.
Kitegeera
Oh.
sigenda gyogerako nnyo genda kubulira wagambye.
Hiyo apartheid racism.
So we see that apartheid racism that happened, we see that um, literally was a system of racial segregation in South Africa, enforced through registration of National Party (NEP), the governing party from 1948 to 94. Under apartheid. The rights, association, and movement of the majority black inhabitants and other ethnic groups were curtailed, and white minority rule was maintained. Apartheid was developed after World War II by the Afrikaner-dominated National Party and Boer-born organizations. We see that the ideology was also enforced in Southwest Africa, which was administered by South Africa under the League of Nations mandate. Okitegeera? So by extension of term is currently used in forms of systematic segregation established by the state of authority in a country against the social and civil rights certain groups, citizens due to ethnic prejudices. We see that South Africa tayinza kubeera, South Africa can't be with all those people beside Ali tukoma budde obwo era yogerako byoyogera.
Sorry.
Hmm?
Sorry for that. But so now to take a part one and trying to take a solution.
Eh?
So that topic here, man, that you overcoming. I don't know some could do when I am a kaka.
Hmm.
Sometimes I will go back down. Formula.
Eh, ali. Ah, Chan,
Sorry for that. We had a small problem. But as we continue with this topic, and our biggest question today was how should we overcome all these issues or this racial discrimination that are, of course, going on, or the discriminations that have been, of course, have been laid on us or acted. So, first of all, the most important thing as Black people, the most important thing for us to overcome all these things is to understand who we are. That is one. Apparently, most of the Africans not understand who they are, their self-worth, like our importance as African people to this community or the entire world. We have been important people throughout history. We have done great things. We are apparently even the reasons why other people are living. We have been a tremendous impact in the positive progress of the universe. But we have, and this is the reason why most of us, this is the reason why our societies do not understand the greatness they hold, because um, racism itself has attacked us in different spheres, starting from education. And we see education is a very great and important factor when it comes to opening the mind of the people. The true history of Africa is supposed to be told both from home. I'm not going to say schools because we know schools have failed us, but we as Black women and men, we ought to teach our children the true history. Not twerking their asses on social media, not teaching your daughters how to twerk, not teaching your sons how to do whatever it is, but teaching them the true history, their true history, so that next time, if somebody else is telling you otherwise, you will know who is a fool and who is fooling who. Two, if we get to understand the true history of the Black people, you'll get to understand who your enemies are. And the moment you get to know who your enemies are, I can guarantee you for sure, we shall see nobody sleeping with the enemy to create Moratos that are actually attacking Africans left and right in Mamaland. We shall avoid scenarios of, family, that, of course, broken African families and societies. If we get to understand our enemies, because it is true, the word enemy may seem to be big, but it just remains the fact that everyone is up against the Black people. So as we look at these things, teach your children the true history. Teach them the right thing, because the education system was never designed to favor the Black people. The education system is up against the Black people. Let's create a website. Let's write novels. Let's write books for little children, if it is in form of cartoons, whatever. Let's do this to empower the Blackness within the minds of these children. Let the children grow up knowing who they are, so that if at all somebody else is telling them otherwise, they already have the stories. We have trusted the education system that has never been, of course, constructed to uplift us as the Black people. To the point that the first thing in the morning you do is wake up, go to work. Of course, we know all this economical system was also designed to keep us away from family. But first thing in the morning, you wake up, first thing you go to work, let your child go to school, the school where they are going to be, of course, told different things. They are being told that they are a lesser being. They are being told that they are something else, which they are not. So we ought to take that time. Follow the real ancestral strategies they used to do. There is always great reasons why our ancestors practiced the things they used to practice. It is very great importance because as we talk about us not being able to unite the Black people all over the world, we always have hope that the generation to come will be able to do that. But as we are not taught in history, as we are not taught way back, if we do not teach this generation what to do, the truth, and who their enemy is, I guarantee you we are not going to see a united Africa, a united Black people. We are not going to see Africa standing up against racism. We are not going to see Black people standing up against discrimination, because we are going to be raising a generation of apparently cowards, because strength starts with the mind. You don't need to be physically six-pack, whatever it is. The mindset is the strength that every Black person needs. And we need to start now by training the generation, prepare them for probably what other people have failed, to let them see the truth for what it is, to let them identify who loves them and who doesn't, to let them know the matrix in this system that is working against the Black people all over the world. Today's stories, the stories we've been explaining to you guys, were not about reminding you, but we wanted to let you know that as much as you cry that you're being discriminated as an African American in America, there is still the same story down. It sounds funny. It sounds funny to say there is racism in Africa, where apparently you think Africa is a place of only Black people. Now, from those stories, ponder. Understand that this attack is not only waged against you in America, but this attack is a worldwide attack that is waged against the Black people all over the world. Now, if we understand this, it will be a very easy step for us. It will be very easy for us to step forward and probably achieve what most people think is unachievable. Ah, Jiba, Jaba. Innocent is even laughing. Juba, Innocent is laughing. And we were just saying, we said Jaba is about to come. So,
Hello, Jib Jabba. How are you doing? How are you doing today?
Innocent is such Jaba.
I was missing Jib Jabba.
Yeah, I
This
know.
morning.
I know.
Here
We
on
had
our-
Lando. Yeah, maybe a little Jaba. That's what Mandela should have said instead of peace and reconciliation. So, you know why we laughed when he just came in the building? We're like, shh, how? Where is Jaba and Lando? And then boom, you come. These are things, these are actually there are a lot that we as Black people ought to know. But of course, we're gonna have part 2 of this very story. The first segment was the part 1 was about the stories that we are telling you, the situation that we still have slavery, positive energy, and here I am. Thank you. Thank you, Jaba. So I hope you'll be here
That's
tomorrow,
our
because tomorrow
influencer on the team.
definitely we are going to be discussing about the things Black people should do to overcome racism. What should we do to make sure that Africa and the Black people all over the world become one, and of course be able to stand up against these discriminations and all the crimes that are being committed on us. Thank you so much, Jibjaba, for coming through. Thank you so much, Ikan Fire. Thank you so much, Derek. Ask you. Guys, thank you so much for those who have been with us throughout these 2 hours. But this has been the first, the episode one of this thing. And thank you, Jibjaba. You can still have a recap, because I believe the discussion today was fire. Yeah, we discussed a lot of as to racism in Africa. Apparently, maybe Jibjaba, you didn't know that we still have slaves now who are slaves, like total slaves in the hands of the whites who are in Africa. You can still look that up. Mauritius is one of the countries where we have the black Moors. Mauritania is one of the countries where we have the black Moors and the white Moors. The black Moors are slaves to the white Moors on a land that belongs to the black people. We see the same stories in Ethiopia. We see the same stories in Namibia. We still see the same stories in Sudan. We see the same stories in Rwanda, where apparently the ones that were chosen to rule are the ones ruling against those others who were never favored by the colonial masters. The story goes on and on. And tomorrow we are having episode 2, where we really have solution to these kind of stories. We wanted to give you a recap. We wanted to give you a view of how racism is not only in the United States of America, the UK, the German, and everywhere, but it is also affecting the black people in Africa. Thank you so much, Jibjaba. Please don't miss the episode 2 of this very topic. This time around, we shall come to explore the ways how we black people should at least do to come out with the solutions, and how we should overcome all these things. For a long time, we've talked about the crimes that have been committed on the black people. This time around, we are coming with a solution. Stay with us, guys. Tomorrow, don't forget to catch me and INNOSSETU live here on Black Hot Fire Network. It has been Africa Maria, of course, from Kampala, Uganda, with my colleague INNOSSETU. Tunasema kwaheri Jibijaba, kwaheri Ikan Fire, kwaheri Derek. Ask you.